Welcome back to my channel. So this video is all about how this fabric I'm holding right here inspired me to self-draft my own coat. It took a lot of work, as you'll see, and I hope you stay tuned until the end to see the final product. So Atelier Logvinova is this amazing Russian workshop where they make these beautiful clothes. And I've had this coat saved on Instagram forever, and this coat was really my big inspiration. This is a mohair and wool blend from Mood Fabrics in New York, and I was so in love with it. I'm pairing it with this gorgeous light pink cassia lining from King Textiles. Now with a wool coat, the first step, or one of the many first steps, is to wash it or treat it first if you plan on ever washing your coat. I'm using a delicate wool wash and soaking it in the bathtub. Then I laid it out to dry. Because it's a napped fabric, I wanted to make sure that the fur in quotation marks, laid flat. So I used a little paper towel and then occasionally a little bit of a boar bristle brush, though it does make it shed a tiny bit. Then this is a clip of me washing my lining and some interfacing fabric. Another thing you want to do with a wool coat is steam it, because wool can shrink with steam. So I'm just covering it with some silk organza and steaming all the fabric. And it did shrink quite a bit, I noticed. This is a clip of me washing my other materials. So some twill tape, some sleeve heads, what is that? The canvas and the silk organza. And I'm just using another delicate wash. Here they are drying. I air dried them. And ironing them out afterwards, because they too can shrink with the steam, though I don't think it's as big of a worry. So to self-draft this pattern, I kind of used another coat pattern to get a basic block, though the shape of the coat that I was using here is completely different from what I wanted. So I really had to kind of pin pieces together and add darts and do weird things. This was my first attempt at a muslin. And there are many muslins, as you will see. I was a little disappointed with this one. I felt like it made me look really wide and boxy in the shoulders especially. In hindsight, maybe that was a good thing. Oh, you'll see after. I pinned some places down to get a more streamlined fit, and then I transferred them. During this process, I was kind of wondering maybe it would be easier to self-draft it, like completely using measurements. So I tried using this tutorial, and this is what I came up with. I felt like the other one was maybe slightly better of a fit, and also had the benefit of already having notches and some markings from the previous pattern. I still had that same issue of the extra fabric there. So I decided instead to sew, to go with my other one, that I made the adjustments on, and this is muslin number 2. I made a lot of changes, so I felt like the back fit better. It wasn't kind of sticking away from my body as much, but as you can see, I can't really close it, so that's definitely an issue. I realized I could close the top of it, and so I just needed to add some width in the lower half. That's a video of my kind of Franken pattern. When I do these adjustments, I end up like slashing and spreading, which makes my pattern look really weird. Okay, this is muslin number 3, I guess. As you can see, this is way better. I can actually close it relatively comfortably. I'm wearing a hoodie underneath, so I know I can wear clothes under my coat. And at this point, I was pretty happy with this, and I thought I was gonna go with it. So I decided to add a collar and one sleeve. And this is how it looked. And I was like, oh, that's what I want. That looks good. I only did one sleeve. Again, I should have done 2. You'll see why at the end. In this clip, I actually noticed there was some drag lines, and so I decided that I did want to add some darts. So here are the darts I added, and they made those lines go away. I wanted to avoid darts if possible, so I didn't have to worry about messing up the plaid, but I'm happy I added them. Okay, final muslin? Is it? Let's see. So the fit looks pretty good. There aren't too many diagonal drag lines. Everything seems to be looking good to my eyes. I like how the back is pretty close fitting. There's not any bunching of fabric. So I decided to then find out where I want to put my pockets. Yeah, when you're self-drafting a pattern, you've got to do all this stuff by yourself, and it kind of sucks. So for the pockets, I had a very specific pocket in mind from this inspo picture I had. So I'm not going to try and explain all these steps. That's the pocket bag I drafted, and I drafted a little facing. And then I did a test pocket. It's a welt pocket, and then I was going to hand sew flaps on top of it. I kind of used another Coat Patterns welt pockets as my base. But I changed a lot of things, so. And then another thing I had to do was mark where the button holes were going to be. After all that marking, which was such a pain, it took me so long, finally I get to start cutting out fabric, and I started with, I guess, the lowest stakes thing, which is cutting out the silk organza, because I decided to underline the wool. I heard online that underlining mohair in silk organza is a good thing. Then I cut out the actual fabric, just one piece at a time because I wanted to pattern match. And then I like to do tailor's tacks for marking. Can't risk like staining fabric with chalk or anything like that. To mark the welt pocket, I based around the line and then snip all of those little thread loops I'm creating. This is what is left behind when you take the pattern piece off. I also cut out pocket flaps, and I tried to match it. This was also another source of kind of headache because you have to subtract the seam allowance, and it's a whole thing. I cut the undercollar on the bias. I don't know if you can tell from this video. And I cut it in 2 parts and also made it a bit smaller than the collar. Shout out to my friend. I was listening to her recital as I was cutting all this out. I had a bit of fabric left over. I hope I can make a skirt, but I don't know. It's not quite enough. That would be so awesome, though. That was a shot just because I can't get over how beautiful this lining is. It's a bit thinner than the linings I usually work with, but it's such a beautiful color. I measure from the grain line arrow to the selvage just to make sure that it's truly on the street of grain. Then I get to pick a pocket bag fabric, which does not need to match. It can be anything you want. Stay tuned to find out what I picked. Actually, I don't even know if I show it, so No, yeah, I do show it. Anyway, this is me cutting the interfacing. This is hair canvas for the undercollar. I'll come back to that later. So first step for the front of the coat, I am underlining it with the silk organza. So I just put that on the wrong side and hand based all around. Lots of hand sewing in this project, as you'll see. Still not that good at it. In this clip, I'm using the selvage of the silk organza to stabilize any curves on the front pieces so they don't stretch out. I also decided to interface the coat front in hair canvas. So I cut out a piece on the bias, definitely on the bias. And then this is me. What am I doing? I'm doing this cool thing where you sew the dart, and when you pull the threads, it like makes the dart for you, and then you can just sew with the machine. It's like a really accurate way of marking it, basically. So there's my dart. Now, I showed that book earlier because that book described a method of balancing the dart that they do in lots of couture garments. So I wanted to try it out. You basically take a little chunk of fabric like that, and you're supposed to do it before you fully sew the dart, but I didn't realize that. So then you sew it kind of like in the middle of the dart and then flip it up. So the fabric chunk you added is above the dart, and then the dart itself is on the bottom. I think it had a nice effect. I would do it again. Up next was sewing the bound buttonholes. I made sure to mark the placement really accurately, and then I sewed the little rectangles. I got pretty comfortable with them after doing so many on my last coat, so I got through these really fast, and I just used the plaid actually as kind of a guide to make sure they were all lining up properly. Then I snipped them and pulled that little fabric square through. At this point, I was still too scared to iron this fabric, so I never pressed these little squares, which I think was a mistake. In hindsight, the fabric can take some pressing. It doesn't completely ruin the fur of it, and it would have made my bound buttonholes a little bit neater. You'll see that one of them is a little wonky, but that's fine. So here I am just making the welts, but I definitely should have used an iron. I'm kind of, why are you doing that? Use an iron. That said, there's not a lot of information about mohair coating online. There's like someone's review of a coat pattern, but mine was pretty stable actually, so I didn't have to baby it as much as I thought. That's the wonky one, but all the other ones looked pretty good. I was happy with them. And that's the back, and you can see how the wonky one, it's wonky because it's kind of at a weird angle, and yeah. Finally, I got the courage to press my fabric, so I just used a self fabric press cloth, iron on the wool setting, and nothing, I didn't hold it on for too long. I used my hands, not a clapper, because I don't want to permanently flatten the nap. And finally, I'm pressing these buttonholes. Okay, next is, these are the welts for the pockets. So you just take this rectangle of fabric, I underlined it, and then I stitched the edges together after folding it. And you trim that, flip it right side out, and you can see here I get this little like rectangle of fabric. It looks pretty cute. Then I just used the welts pocket installation instructions from a previous coat that I made. I did a lot of hand basting, which I totally recommend if you're gonna do welt pockets. It's so nice to not have to worry about taking out pins while you're trying to be very accurate in your sewing. What am I doing here? I'm turning under a little bit of fabric for the pocket facing. Then you sew that to the pocket bag. And here you can see my pocket bag fabric. I decided to use, it's an Oxford cotton shirting that I've had. It's pretty durable, which I like. The color does not matter for pockets. And I thought the mint was cute and I wasn't really going to use it for anything else. So that's why I did that. More sewing. I'm not going to detail the steps of the welt pockets. I just did it the way that any Vogue pattern will tell you to do it. This is the most nerve-wracking part where you snip the middle. I use a rotary cutter to start it. And then I take my fabric shears. Ideally, you're supposed to do this with small scissors, and I definitely should get some small scissors. But right now, these work fine. You just have to be really careful. Once you've snipped, then you can flip everything to the wrong side, which is a pretty fun part, in my opinion. And you're left with a little welt pocket, and it looks so pretty. You sew then the little triangle ends. If you've made a welt pocket, you know what I'm talking about. And then you sew around the pocket bags, so you have a closed pocket that you can put stuff in. I like to zigzag and pink the edges just so that it's nice and durable. Next, I'm showing you the pocket flap method. I decided to line them in a lining fabric just to reduce bulk. I actually found when I tried it with just self fabric lining, it was way too bulky. See, you can see? And it just made the coat look kind of clunky and less polished. So these little squares of lining fabric are for my buttonhole facings, which is on the facing piece of the coat. And you basically do another bound buttonhole. You make the little rectangles, but this time you don't push in the fabric to create the welts. You just leave it so it's a window. Then it was onto the collar. I used my muslin to decide where I wanted the roll line to be, and I marked that on the fabric and then marked it on my coat fabric. On that roll line, then you take a cotton twill tape and you pin it on there, and you can see there's a little bit of tension. That's supposed to help it curve around your neck and encourage the roll. I just used a machine to stitch that down, and I actually really liked how that looked. I haven't done that before, and I'll definitely do that again. Then I'm ironing it, and I'm trying to get a bit of a curve going, so that's why the hand is there. With some silk thread. It's the only silk thread I had, that's why it's blue. I decided to pad stitch, and while you're pad stitching, you're supposed to kind of curve the fabric so it holds the curve. I don't know if I did that good of a job of it. I need to work on my pad stitching, but none of it shows through, so that's a win. Here I am using the letter programming embroidery setting on my machine to create my logo or my tag for this coat. I decided to put my little YouTube channel name, so I thought that would be a nice touch. And then I top stitched it onto the back neck facing. Next up, I get to assemble the lining, which is such a relief after working on the main fabric, because the lining is relatively low stakes, you know. If it's on the inside, no one's really going to see it. And you don't have to worry about things like plaid matching or how to iron wool. It's pretty straightforward. So this is me sewing the dart. Just sewed it in the same way. I didn't bother balancing it because the fabric is thin. And I, of course, press it in. I'm not even using a press cloth here. I did test my fabric, so I knew the iron wasn't gonna hurt it. And then more sewing. I think in this clip I'm sewing the front to the back, maybe? Oh, and I also sewed the back neck facing to the back fabric. And in this clip, I'm just attaching more pieces together. It's a lot of pretty simple sewing in this part. I didn't mention it, but I drafted my own lining pieces, which is a lot more work, and it really makes you appreciate patterns. I don't think I'll self-draft something for a while. There are the sleeves. I had some trouble getting the sleeves in, honestly. Maybe something to do with how I raised the armhole for the lining. But you know, lining sleeves, especially, you hardly see them. They're tucked away inside the coat. As long as they're not making it uncomfortable and it doesn't bother you too much, then I think it's totally okay. So you can see on mine, it's definitely not perfect. There's some tucks in there. And that's what it's looking like. It's its own little coat. Now I get to sew the shoulder seams and the side seams together. Close-up shot of my sewing machine. And it gets really bulky with all this hair canvas, wool, sewing, interfacing, silk organza. There's so much in there. I don't know what I was thinking. But yeah, I definitely had to grade some seams and trim some stuff out. And pressing was also very important with so much bulk. But that's how I got it. Looking pretty good. I didn't include putting the silk organza and the little hem pieces on all the pattern pieces, but as you can see, I've done that. I spared you the time of watching me do it. It took a while. I sew the seam of the sleeve now so I can ease it in. So you may have noticed I'm not using a clapper for this coat. The clapper is the piece of wood that you slam down, and I was worried about how it would affect the mohair snap. So instead, I have my aunt to thank for this little tool. Shout out Martha. It's a little seam roller, and you can just press the seam allowance so you're not really risking anything like that. Then I basted the sleeve into the jacket. There's a little bit of a pre-made sleeve head that I basted in there as well. And then I sewed it for real on the machine. This shot, you can really see how many layers of fabric that is. That's cool. And that's what they look like. Okay, time to take my painstakingly pad-stitched under collar and attach it to the top collar. It's a little smaller. Honestly, I should have made it even smaller to really encourage that curve, but you know, next time. That brown thread you see is so I can turn out the corners really well. And that's my finished collar. So it's just separate from the coat right now. And the next step is to attach it. As you can see, I've done there. And here is the outer shell of the coat, ready to be attached to the lining, which is a very long seam, and you feel like you're wrangling this giant piece of fabric with all of the pattern pieces you cut out in one. And you understitch. And then I pressed the hem. I wanted it to be across one line. And then I hand sewed it. I'm making this look so easy, but it took so long. And then I used super strong button thread in light gray color to attach the buttons. Wow, yes, I did this in the middle of the night. If you've sat through this whole video, then you definitely deserve to see what the coat ended up looking like. So without further ado, here it is. Okay, here it is. Finished coat. I think it looks pretty similar to the inspo picture, and the fact that I did this without a pattern, like on my own, I'm very proud of that. I'm most proud about the pockets, I think. I'm least proud about the sleeves because unfortunately the shoulders, you can see in this picture, they're too narrow. Like, I guess I just did not catch that when I was fitting. I never made a 2-sleeve muslin, and yeah, it makes the sleeves too short. I guess bracelet length, I could say. It was on purpose, maybe. Even though it's not perfect, I'm really proud of myself and also very happy that I finally finished.